Mr. Ken Cook, co-founder and president of the Environmental Working Group. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. You don't understand how honored I am that I'm talking
Oh,
to you.
Allie, the pleasure's mine. I love your mission. So I'm thrilled to have a chance to visit with you today.
Thank you. And I think for those who are unfamiliar, I feel very blessed and lucky because I have known about EWG because of your incredible logo. Like that logo is seared into my mind. And whenever I shop for products, whenever I am looking to implement, whether it be food, personal products, at home products, when I see the EWG verified, I know that I am in the good and everything is perfect. Right? But I'm really curious. You started this in 1993. Walk me through that. Like, where were you in 1993? What spurred this concept of what now is
Yeah.
the Environmental Working Group?
Yeah, sure. 1993. So we're 31 now.
Same
And
age.
as it's pretty obvious that fits. We were your typical environmental organization back then, focused on we were based in Washington, D.C. That's where we
Mhm.
started. That's where our entire staff was located. We later added California. And we were a environmental policy group. We were an advocacy organization, and our model was to conduct research that got you into the newspaper or on TV, that created a stir focused on an issue, might be pesticides, might be tap water contaminants or air quality. And then the idea was, again, this is 1993, you would go to Capitol Hill, you would go to regulatory agencies, EPA, FDA, and you would make the case for changes in law and regulation that would solve the problem you had identified. And this was pretty much how the environmental community worked from 1970 onward, when Richard Nixon established EPA by executive order and we started passing Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Superfund, pesticide laws, and so forth. But that was in 93 and things have changed. Our focus is no longer really entirely on the federal policy process. Now we work at the state level. We spend a lot of time educating consumers so they can take action on their own, Allie. It's increasingly important, I think, for people to recognize that there are real shortcomings in our regulatory system,
Yep.
a lot of loopholes, a lot of holes in the safety net,
Yes.
as it were. And there are things people can do for themselves and for their families that protect them, if they're knowledgeable, from the kinds of toxic chemical exposures and other problems that our researchers focus on. So we're about 80 people. We were about 10, 10 back in 93 or even fewer. Um, we have a lot of scientists on the staff. We have database programmers on the staff, designers, attorneys, lobbyists. We're
Mhm.
based in both in DC and in California, but we also work in other states when the situation arises. Oftentimes we're requested for assistance from other states. So now it's a hybrid, right? We do still focus on federal policy, law and
Mhm.
regulation. We're in a big fight now to make sure the Farm Bill takes care of the environment and our health, not just
Yeah.
subsidies. We're fighting in the regulatory process to crack down on these forever chemicals that are in all of us. They're in our water, our air. It's a real disaster. We do a lot of that policy work, but we also have really focused on providing consumers, regular people, with information they can use to protect themselves. Part of that is the EWG Verified program, our third party certification for a fairly small number of products, several
Mhm.
thousand personal care products and dozens of home cleaning products. We have a mattress that's verified. That is aimed at really answering the question, what do you wash your hair with, Ken? What do you eat?
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
sleep on? And we got to the point where, I didn't want to keep saying, well, the answer to your question is we need to pass a new law, then we need to pass regulations, then those regulations have to go in effect, and industry has to comply. All of those steps are still important. but it's hard to say that to someone sitting in the front row who's 7 months pregnant. And I know that what's going to happen if we follow that course, that kid will be in college by the
Right.
time, right, those regulations take effect. So we really did pivot and started working directly with the private sector. In some cases, we found that we had a lot in common with a lot of companies that want to do the right thing. They like our standard setting because then they know what to aim for, what to follow when they're trying to formulate products and
Right.
make them safe. So it's been a real evolution. We think environmentalism has changed a lot. So there's still a lot of things we're fighting against. That's how you think of environmentalists, right? Stop that bad highway, stop the pollution, stop this, stop that. Still
Right.
plenty of that going on. But increasingly, Allie, it's things we're fighting for that
Mhm.
are assuming greater importance, fighting for the kinds of safer products that we put our seal on, trying to move the industry in that direction.
Yeah.
Consumers, regular people are vital in that effort because
Yeah.
the federal government just and the state government, they can't get the job done to the satisfaction, to the standards we need for you and your listeners.
I'm curious, have you always had a heart for advocacy? Like, where did this come from?
That's a good question. Yeah, I was that student council president guy, right, back in high school. I know. I'm
No, Ken, I was too. I was president like all 4 years of high school.
yeah, yeah, yes.
Real
Part of me,
Mexican wheel.
yeah, part of me had that politician side. I look, often found myself, even when I was quite young, certainly in high school, that I was paying attention to social issues and especially the ones that were irritating to me, problems that should have been solved that I was reading about in the St. Louis Post Dispatch growing up with the St. Louis Globe Democrat. And I think from a very early age, I read important books. I read The Closing Circle by Barry Commoner. I read The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich. Those were my two formative environmental texts that took very different perspectives. From high school onward, I just felt I had a connection to this newfangled environmental movement that was
Yeah.
growing up. From I graduated high school in 1969. My
Mhm.
first Earth Day was the spring of 1970. I was a freshman at the University of Missouri and participated in the events there, helped
Yeah.
organize some of them. It just really clicked for me. And then I had a special affinity for the relationship between agriculture and food and the environment because I spent a lot of time on my uncle's farms. My dad died when I was 5, so I was raised by my mom and Aunt Ruthie, sisters.
Yeah.
But on my dad's side of the family, there were cattle farmers, cattle
Mhm.
ranchers in southern Missouri, and they had cow calf operations, beautiful farms. And I spent a lot of time there. And so I gradually began to think of all the ways in which agricultural production, growing our food, affected the environment, pesticide use, soil erosion, all kinds of questions about water quality. And
Yeah.
so that was the beginning of my career was that focus, agriculture and the environment. Yeah.
That's incredible, and it's so interesting because I feel like we're just now at the tip of really having all eyes, and people are becoming aware of pesticides in agriculture. So the fact that you knew about this and we're doing work on this 30 years ago is incredible.
We back then there were obviously DDT had just been banned in 1970 when I was still in high school, and there was a growing understanding that the way we were utilizing these chemicals on the landscape was problematic. But for many years before that, it was seen as a miracle of modern chemistry. Modern agriculture was seen as something to admire without reservation. But the more we learned about it, and this is true of a lot of these toxic chemicals generally, you can chart forth everything from lead to mercury to PCBs, dioxins, DDT. The more we study these substances, the lower the safe levels go. The more scientists learn, the more they conclude, thought this amount might have been safe if it was a residue on a pear.
Mhm.
Not so much now, because the more we learn, we recognize that there are these oftentimes very subtle effects that pesticides can have. They don't necessarily cause cancer in a short-term period. Cancer, as you well know, is a long-term complex disease that don't always cause birth defects. Sometimes they influence or kind of derail our hormone system in
Mhm.
ways that are subtle. We now know that's the case for many pesticides. And so, this kind of discovery process is natural in the sciences, of course. This is has what has caused EWG to spend more and more time trying to understand how we can help people just avoid exposures where there's indication of adverse biological activity. Our position is we should understand whatever we can about the current science. We should also understand probably industries are going to be fighting it out with us in
Yeah.
front of the government and oftentimes winning and keeping products on the market beyond what we think is appropriate. And so we're trying to tell people here's how you can enjoy the benefits of those products without the toxics. And the first big example, the first revelation for us that there was, as it were, an audience for this kind of
Mhm.
information was when we published our Dirty Dozen guide to fruits and vegetables. I know you're familiar with it. We looked at USDA data that they publish every year. They analyze fruits and vegetables for pesticide residues, and we reached two conclusions. One, there was a group of fruits and vegetables that fairly regularly are on the Dirty Dozen. They have the most pesticide residues. Apples are usually on the list,
Yep.
strawberries, it changes a little bit year. So those are the Dirty Dozen, and we said, try and buy those organic. More
Yeah.
important to eat fruits and vegetables than to switch to Twinkies or Hostess cupcakes for your sweets. Keep eating the fruits and vegetables, but still, if you can shift away. And then at the other end of that, those testing results were lots of fruits and vegetables that were grown conventionally, grown with chemicals, but the nature of the chemicals that were used when they were sprayed on the crops meant that you weren't getting residues. So, a good example is a banana, right? Most of the residue of a banana, when it's has pesticides applied, it remains on the
Peel.
skin. Yeah, on
Mm.
the peel. And so we came up with the Clean 15 because we wanted to democratize these things. And that's a really important theme for us. We're not happy when we come up with a solution for consumers that's only the most elite consumers, the most educated consumers who might have
Mhm.
the wherewithal and be living in a place where they can buy these things.
Mhm.
Online has changed it somewhat, of course, but it
Mhm.
doesn't change the economics if it's too expensive. For us, it's only the beginning of a solution, democratizing healthy living, healthy cosmetics, food, healthy cleaning products, healthy home furnishings. All of it has to be democratized. That's a big job. The government's not going to drive it that far enough. It's going to drive it to a certain point. We legalize an awful lot of pollution. And as we like to say at EWG, just because it's legal does not mean it's safe.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's a good line.
Yeah, like speed limits. I always give the example. There's someone who does a study pretty regularly for the Institute for Highway Traffic Safety. I'm sorry, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And he does a study that shows when we move the speed limit up to 75 miles per hour,
Yeah.
because people wanted to get there faster,
Right.
we started using a lot more fuel and highway deaths went up. So it was legal and everyone said, yeah, let's move it up to 75. But if you looked at the human consequences of it, it wasn't safe. Same with lots of other things.
It's like
Smoking's still legal, but it's
yeah,
not
that's
safe.
like smoking. That's the one I always use. It's interesting because one of the pushbacks I think the chemo club and me specifically I receive is you try to share alternatives, right? It's like, okay, instead of using this, look at XYZ. And there has always been a gap and a socioeconomical gap
Yes.
between, okay, when it comes to food, like trying to eat organic, try no, not everyone. I can barely go to Whole Foods. Like it
Yeah.
is
Yeah. It's
things are
expensive.
very expensive. And so the fact that EWG, you guys do your best to create suggestions and to educate us on the different areas that you can shop at, look at products for any sort of socioeconomic income is huge.
Yeah, no, it's really important to us. We don't want to be the stereotypical wag our finger at you environmentalist. We want to offer choices. We want to invite people to, if they're concerned about pesticides, we want to invite people to look at our resources for ways they can reduce their exposures.
Yeah.
Chemicals in personal care products. Under federal law, you can put almost any chemical into a personal care product. We have reviewed thousands of those chemicals and found concerns, toxic concerns about a lot of them. And we've made that public on our database called Skin Deep and on our Healthy Living app. And we
Mhm.
do that, first of all, not to scare people, just to say, look, you're not crazy to wonder if there's toxic stuff in our world. We have ample reason to be concerned about that, but you're not helpless. You do have choices, and we want the choices to, over time, overtake the market so that the better options become the norm. And in some areas we've begun to see that happen, but we have a long way to go.
And I told you this offline, but I am seeing a greater push, right, for certain things not to be searchable, for certain things not to show up when you are doing research.
Yeah.
And what's beautiful about EWG is that you guys do have the actual research, the articles, the data, the scientific facts. And that is huge because I think people, when they're looking for information, they go, I'm silent. I'm the only one doing this. I'm crazy. Maybe the pesticides aren't really that big of a deal because so much is censored. No, that's
Yeah.
not true. It is a big deal. It is being pushed down, and it's because of EWG, we're able to actually see the scientific facts of what's happening in not only like pesticides, but in everything in our day to day.
And I know this is thematically something that you emphasize. You're not alone
Yeah,
on this journey. I love how you emphasize that message that we're all really searching for the same kinds of things, options that are healthier for us and for our family. You're not crazy to be looking for those things, and you're not alone. We're thinking about it. There are a lot of other good minded people, including people in companies who feel the same way, who have kids and husbands and wives and sisters and daughters. There's no reason to be afraid of it. There's a lot of pressure from the private sector, obviously, to discourage this
right.
journey. Just, if it's on the store shelf, it's okay. If it's being sold in a furniture store, it's just fine.
Mm,
That, it turns out, is not really the case, at least by our lights. You should take a closer look. It's not easy to take a closer look. We have a really robust team of scientists. They're publishing things directly on our website to help consumers. They're also publishing research papers in the scientific literature. So we're dead serious about this, about giving people our best take on what they should be doing to try and reduce exposures to toxic chemicals. And you don't have to give up modern life. You don't
right.
have to move to a mountain meadow and live in a yurt and eat grass and twigs. Um, and there are more options all the time. Rally, look what's happened. It's, again, still not perfect, but the organic food sector is now a $70 billion subset of the food economy. It needs to grow more. When I was first working on organic in the 90s, you could barely find it. And so I think the more consumers look for this, over time, the prices go down, the real prices go down as against buying power. And more companies jump in to try and take advantage of the market for cleaner, healthier living. There's some greenwashers out there, no
Totally.
question about it, but there really is an authentic drive for that, and it's propelled by people like the people listening to this podcast now. What can I do if I'm looking to take care of myself and my family? And there are plenty of options now, and there are more every day. Food, personal care, how you clean your house. There, even in when it comes to bigger issues like the energy and how I can help clean up the air, solar panels, electric vehicles, steps you can take to reduce energy use in your home that a lot
Mhm.
of other people are doing. the it's doesn't all have to be law and regulation. Important that we maintain that, but there are many options, and I think that's what makes it such an exciting time to be an environmentalist, to be
Oh,
honest.
totally.
Right? The internet, the
Totally.
transparency that's available, all of the people who are realizing I want to contribute something here. It can
Mhm.
be a business leader, it can be someone working in a big corporation, and word begins to filter up. It's never an overnight change, but you can tell there's an energy out there about creating an environmental health economy, and we're proud to be part of it.
I do think it's interesting, and I always give credit to the moms because I think what has happened is we've seen this demand come from moms, and I think I read
Yes.
somewhere it's been like the past I think it's been like the past 10, 12 years where moms are the ones that have created and demanding better products, better food, better XYZ for their households. And I think moms get such sometimes like a bad reputation or a bad rap or like, they don't know what they're talking about. But it's because of working moms who are demanding better for themselves and for their children. We have now seen a lot of private companies step up to the plate. We've seen new companies develop and form
For
because
sure.
consumers want better. They're educating themselves. And thanks to EWG, we're getting more tangible resources to read and to really understand. But it's because of the mom that we are seeing, I think, such an explosion of healthy lifestyle and wellness in general. And
Absolutely.
there's that.
Absolutely. And we this past year to date, round about 33 or so million visits to our website and another 10 million to our Healthy Living app. So a lot of people are seeking this information. And at least from the web traffic, we know that over 80% of them are women.
Wow.
So you're right on. My team is trying to catch up, but we're not the sharpest tool in the
That's okay.
toolbox,
Sometimes
right?
you don't need to be. You
It
just have to
takes
be a
it
tool.
it takes a while. I tell the story. We did a focus group one time, and we separated the men and the women, and we went to the women with this information. Said these chemicals are toxic.
Yeah.
There's still scientific debate about how toxic, how dangerous. And before you could even finish the wrap, the women were like, just we may not ever settle this, right? Let's just tell me what's safer. Let's just move on to the option. Meanwhile, you go over to the men's focus group, and we kept them separate because men were mansplaining everything, of course,
Of
right?
course.
So you go over to the men, and I swear this actually happens. We thought, how do we reach these people, these males? And so we thought, let's start talking about chemicals that affect sperm. Let's talk about sperm counts going down,
Yes.
apparent seem to be related to these chemical exposures. And more worse than that, maybe the sperm that are left are less motile, they're less active, right?
Yeah.
And so the guys are sitting there, sitting around the table. The focus group moderator lays out all this information to them, and they're sitting there, and we're thinking behind the mirror, we're thinking, we got them. We
Yeah.
finally broke through. We're going to talk about sperm to men. And
Yes.
the guy raises his hand, right?
Right.
And we thought, okay, this is the moment. Guy raises his hand and he says, when we signed up for this, they said there'd be sandwiches.
Stop. No. You're joking.
No, they said there'd be sandwiches. We've got a ways to go.
God
You know,
bless women is all I'm
God,
gonna say.
yeah, God, yeah, and God forgive my team, but it really is. There's a divide. I mean, if you poll after poll, you look at various questions about environmental concern, local pollution, toxic chemicals, whatever, it stratifies the same way. It's
Yeah.
black women of color at the top,
Mhm.
white women right next to them,
Mhm.
black men, and then
Mhm.
coming in last are people who look like me in
Mhm.
terms of awareness and concern. And I think just like there's an immune system that's developed that is slowing down law and regulation and has been for a long time, the immune system of the regulated industry. I think men, particularly men, white men who've, come up, in my era and nearby eras, there's a sense that if things were so bad, they would have been fixed, or maybe people are exaggerating the harm, or maybe,
Right.
we're not being as brave and courageous and manly as
Mhm,
we should be.
mhm.
And, all of that is very difficult to overcome, and it affects our decision making. It affects what happens in legislatures. You see the makeup of these legislatures, but it
Yeah.
also, I think, is, I hear from people all the time that it's the wife in the family, the mom in the family, just as you say, who's the agent of change. Now, I have come across some amazing examples where, oh, you think I'm an EWG nut? You should meet my husband, right? So I love those moments.
I
But
love that. Right, that's so great. Speaking of EWG bringing a lot of research to light, I do want to list just and highlight just some of your national victories. Okay, so for those listening, the Environmental Working Group National Victories, you guys were the first to ever find pesticides in baby foods. You were the first ever to research forever chemicals, also known as PFAS.
yeah,
You're the first to solidify economic justice for farmers. You guys found pollution in newborns. Ugh. Created the Toxic Substance Control Act and the Toxic Free Cosmetics Act. So that's just me highlighting a couple. Those are huge fundamental issues that you guys have tackled. Like that's huge.
thank you. Yeah, we weren't alone. We have allies in the public interest community. There are a lot of folks out there fighting for all of you. We're proud of the role we played
Yeah.
in each of those battles. And of course, they still go on. We're trying to ban a very dangerous weed killer here in California, paraquat, that just about the most toxic weed killer on the planet. And we're still using it here. It's been banned in 60 some other countries, but we still use it in California and across the US. We're fighting to glyphosate out of our food. It's sprayed at the end of crop seasons on oats and other foods. And because it's right close to harvest, it ends up right in the food. And we could eliminate that dietary exposure. There are other issues with Roundup, with glyphosate, but the dietary exposure could be dealt with pretty quickly if we just got rid of those uses.
Yeah.
So there, fight after fight, of course, we're trying to stop the flow of these forever chemicals into our world. They're in all of us now.
Yeah.
They're in you from the time, even while you're in the womb.
They're
Uh,
detecting the umbilical cords.
yeah, we tested umbilical cord blood back in 2004 for something like 400 plus toxic chemicals, and we found an average of 200 in babies before they come into the world. And we were the first group to look at umbilical cord blood for such a wide range of chemicals. And we found chemicals that had been banned decades before we drew the blood samples. They stick around, things like DDT, banned in 1970, early 70s, it was phased out in the US. 2004, breakdown products of DDT were still showing up in these babies. So sometimes you have something that's very long lived in the environment, doesn't break down.
Mhm,
You really want to pay attention to chemicals like that, because if it turns out they're toxic, and it often does turn out that they are,
mhm.
you're going to have to deal with them for generations.
Yeah. I'm curious, what is it like? So when the EWG decides to tackle an issue and it comes or it has to deal with a private company, right?
Yeah.
Now, private companies have a ton of money. They have their lawyers. They can go
Yep.
up, they can crush the everyday person. What's it like when EWG goes, no, we are going to stand up to Roundup. We are going to stand up to whatever private company. Walk me through, like, what does that look like? How do you create like communication? Like, how's that work?
Yeah. It's a very good question. We don't even think about it. It's just
Yeah.
what we do. But when you
Yeah.
take it apart, I think it has some common elements. First of all, we pride ourselves on having a very firm grip on the science. Sometimes it's science that's in a regulatory filing at an agency.
Mhm.
Oftentimes there's not much science there. Personal care product ingredients, you have to go to the scientific literature, or you have to go to regulatory agencies in other countries. So the first thing is we take a good hard look at the science and ask ourselves, is this something that we should be paying attention to? We have limited resources. What should we focus on? The second step is we look at options for dealing with the exposures that might result as how these chemicals are used in products and how products are used by people. And we make a decision. Does this call for some sort of regulatory effort? Do we have to try and get a law passed in California? We could never get these laws passed in DC anymore. That's
Yeah.
another subject. But we take a look at that. Then we look and see, is this a company that we could approach and say, hey, have you thought about trying something different here? Have you thought about another approach that could give you the same product, the same value, same consumer benefit?
So you communicate this to the company.
Yeah, we
Okay.
oftentimes we will. We'll go out to them and
Yeah.
ask them that. And then I think our approach is, if the science is solid, defensible in our view, we don't care how big they are or how much money they have. We're going to tell the public about it. We like to think we do it in a way that's straightforward. We just say, look, we think there's evidence of carcinogenicity here. It's not a known human carcinogen. It's got a
Mhm.
much weaker kind of profile, but we think it should be avoided. We think they should switch to something different. So we
Mhm.
lay out all those arguments, and we've had some saber rattling aimed at us before. We've never been sued by a company. Um,
Really?
no, we never have. We've always made the case that we stand on the science. If we have to set our own standard when the government doesn't, we do that, and we defend it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've more than held our own on things like forever chemicals and various pesticides, PCBs, and
Mhm.
so forth. We feel like we have credibility with regulatory agencies and independent scientists. As I say, we publish in the scientific literature on a fairly regular basis. And
Mhm.
it just comes down to this. If, I mean, our organization is based on the premise that the science is telling us that we're not doing enough to protect the public health on
Mhm.
issue after issue. We also know that the extent to which some of these regulatory agencies have, in effect, been captured by the industries they're meant to regulate, we can't rely on that in most cases to move quickly enough to protect people.
Right.
That pregnant woman sitting in the front row who's
Yeah.
got her hand raised. What about this? And
Yeah.
so that's where we just, our straightforward approach is, here's what we think of this exposure. Here's how you can avoid it.
Mhm.
And increasingly, as we're doing that, we're seeing that scientists around the world who have a sort of like-minded approach to things, they're concerned about these chemicals, these exposures, these pollutants, contaminants. They're saying, look, we may not get around to regulating these in the classical ways we've had over the years in time to provide the protection people need right now. If millions and millions of people are being exposed, we should talk to them about how they can avoid that exposure. That the product will still be legal, the chemical is still legal, but here's a route to avoid it. And with
Yes.
the internet, that's what changed everything, Allie. I mean, everyone in your audience probably doesn't even know from pre-internet times, but I can tell you the difference it made when it came along, and the search for information, the value of transparency, the ability of people to do research,
Mhm.
put a premium, we felt, on the kind of data and ratings and information we were able to provide.
Yeah.
So that's what's animating things now. It used to be the science went to the government passed regulations, industry complied, and at the end, citizens and consumers benefited. Now the science through the internet goes straight to the citizen consumer. They start making changes. Industry notices it. They start, some of them start moving in the marketplace to offer safer things, and government's the last step instead of the
Yes.
second step. So
Yeah.
science is still the beginning, but the dynamic has been changed by the dynamism of the internet.
It's so interesting. I just spoke with somebody, and there is a lawsuit right now, and I think I can say it. There's a lawsuit right now against Baxter, who is the largest manufacturer of IV bags.
Yep.
I'm sure you've heard of this.
Yep.
And it has come out that these IV bags, so when you're getting your intravenous chemo, this makes me sick, or any sort of intravenous whatever from these bags, right? Full of forever chemicals are in these bags, right? So not only you're getting whatever medicine is left that hasn't been turned toxic from the forever chemicals, but that's going straight into people's veins. Long story short, Baxter has been like, okay, you're right. We have no argument against this, but give us 10 years,
Yeah.
figure this out, and then it's going to be fine. But they don't want to put out the warning sign. They don't want to tell people, like, oh, yeah, we've just been caught using all these forever chemicals in our bags. And right now it's going through legislature of whether or not they need to provide a warning to people going to UCSF, going to Stanford Hospital that, hey, we're going to hook you up, but just so you know, tons of chemicals and toxins in this bag. And it's just so interesting because what you're saying about not being able to keep up with production, it's infuriating because these big companies have known, like they've known for years, like what's
They've
been,
known.
and it
They
makes
have totally
me
known.
that they need 10 years to figure out. It just, the whole thing is so disheartening. And I think that's why we're seeing all this research being done by the average person, because we were hearing of
Yeah,
this
that's
internet,
right.
all these little stories. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And it makes me furious at these massive companies. I don't know if it's just, my dad is an environmental scientist.
Oh, is that right?
So yeah, and so he deals with toxic chemicals in water, and he does a lot of work in third world countries to make contaminated land viable again.
Oh, fascinating.
But I think growing up, I've always had an interest and a love for it. And growing up, I know my dad would come home and he would be like, these governments know and they hide it. And it's just
Yeah.
like these companies, these massive companies know and they hide it until they get caught. They beg and plead, oh, we're so sorry. We need 10 years. You're just like, when is enough?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, to go back to a previous point in our conversation, men may not quite be able to absorb that sperm counts are going down and sperm are not moving as aggressively as a man would want them to move. But the thing that gets to men is when they've been lied to.
Oh,
And you talk to trial lawyers, I've talked to many of them. If you're in court and you have a jury with men on it,
mhm.
the thing you want to show them is the internal company documents that show the company's knew decades or knew all along that something was wrong, whether it's a Ford Bronco that tips over or chemicals in an IV bag or toxic substances that are being dumped into a river. They'll usually hide behind the fact that at the time we did it, it was totally legal.
Yeah.
And now that it's not legal, we realize we're also going to say it's not safe. But
Mhm.
they knew all along. They knew that these SUVs would tip over at speed. They knew that these chemicals being dumped into water were toxic and sometimes were forever chemicals that
Yeah.
didn't break down. And so I hear it. And I think that is also powering some of this consumer concern. Just like I agree with you completely. If you look at any number of pesticides, uh, chlorpyrifos is an insecticide that was used for many years inside homes and on fruits and vegetables to kill bugs. It was an insecticide,
Right.
worked on the nervous system, very toxic.
Mhm.
And fundamentally, it was used for decades. And all during that time, the farmers said it was safe. The
Mhm.
manufacturers of the chemical said it was safe. And EPA said, we've looked at it, we've regulated it, it's safe. And they say it's safe right up until the day they ban it because it's not. And people remember this stuff,
Yeah.
right? People think, okay,
Yes.
I know there's a game going on here. I know there may be very intentioned scientists in government, but they're playing by the rules that were set that make it difficult for them to tell the truth or
Right.
act quickly to get a product off the market. Same with those IV bags.
Yep.
And it is infuriating. And so what happens then, I think, my bet is that before Baxter's required to do anything by law or regulation, the power of people demanding it, hospital buyers, suppliers, they're going to start making a shift. They're going to say, yes, we'll buy IV bags, but you don't have 10 years. I want clean bags ASAP. And
Yeah.
if you don't have them, I'm going to buy from some upstart or some company, some new company, because I'm going to specify I don't want forever chemicals in my IV bags. And that dynamic is much faster and deeper in many cases in terms of impact on human health than anything the government can do.
Exactly. It makes me think. It makes me sick because my mom, who had chemo, right, intravenous
Yeah,
chemo,
I,
she did
I
that.
read the story and yeah, amazing.
Awful,
Yeah.
just awful. But
And
also
how it changed your life.
how it changed my life. But also knowing that as she was getting chemo, was the chemo even working because it was already probably toxic by the time it was entering her bloodstream because of the bags. And I
Yep.
think of all my girlfriends who are pregnant, right? Like they're all always hooked up to IVs and I go, oh my
Yeah.
God. So
Yeah.
I am really curious as to how, I guess this all just happened on Wednesday. So Baxter flew in, they all flew in from DC and New York, the CEO, their entire legislation, or all their lawyers all flew into Sacramento, I guess, on Wednesday. So I'm really curious how this is all going to play out. But
Yeah, that's not a bill we've been involved in this year, but yeah, we'll be watching it too. I think we support it. I'd have to look at have to check with our lobbyists in Sacramento. But yeah,
what are you
that's
doing?
it. This is the time these
This,
legislature has to decide, and it may not make it over the finish line in terms of legislation this year, but it's going to have an impact.
yes.
I'm hoping it does. Again, it's not something we have worked directly on, but I got to tell you, California is still a place where good change like that environmentally can happen. And as we are fond of saying at EWG, what happens in California does not stay in California because this market is so big and so powerful globally. The
Mhm.
economy here is so enormous that changes that happen here, Ali, quickly get picked up in other states. We worked on legislation to ban a bunch of food additives, 4 or 5 food additives a couple of years ago. And now states all over the country are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's important to fight where these battles are. And sometimes it's right here in Sacramento and we overlook it. So I'm thrilled that you mentioned that this is a state
Mhm.
debate underway right now. Let's wish them the best to the advocates that they can win this fight.
You bring up a good point because I feel like since COVID, I think people have been very quick to speak ill of California. We saw a lot of people leave California and talk bad about California. And what I don't think people realize is how important California really is to the
Totally.
overall health of the United States because we are the pinnacle of technology. We are the pinnacle of health, of wellness, of research, of scientific findings. And this is a little personal between you and I, but I'm from here. I'm from the East Bay, grew up in Danville, like California girl through and
Yeah.
through, San Francisco girl. And I think I would say it's been recently. I have almost had like this renaissance of falling back in love with California. I think so many of my friends left the state. You hear a lot of celebrities, a lot of podcasters who now are in Austin really talk poorly about California. But ever since I have started the Chemo Club and have started this podcast, anything good that is affecting you and I, the normal person, is all because it's coming from California. And you, as a CEO and founder, and now you live in California,
Yeah.
I'd love for you just to highlight, like, what do you love about California? Like, what are you seeing on your end of this state taking truly like being the fortitude and the cornerstone to how the rest of the US lives?
Oh, look, when we first moved out to California, I asked one of the really influential people on my board of directors, and his response was, I think it's great to have the head of a national environmental organization be located someplace other than DC, and
Mhm.
especially in California. And what he said has really proven to be true. I had a dear childhood friend, and when I told her I was moving out here, she said, Kenny, that's how far back we went. She said, Kenny, every time I go to California, I feel like I'm visiting the future.
Wow. Mhm.
And as growing up in Missouri, I was desperate to be a California boy, but I didn't make it here until my 60s. But But I got to tell you, I have the same feeling that you do. It all feels so fresh to me. There's a sense of ability to solve problems,
Mhm.
a sense that we can push through difficult obstacles and get things done. I know a lot of people are discouraged by various aspects of what's going on in California. Oftentimes they're going on everywhere, but we just get talked
Totally.
about more, right?
Mm,
But I find it inspiring that there are so many people out here who've been through cycles of invention
yeah.
enough times that it's kind of part of their DNA
Yeah.
to come up with a new law, to come up
Mhm.
with a new regulatory approach, to invent some new marketing system, to come up with a brand that represents health and safety. It's
Yeah.
just second nature out here.
Yes.
And it's almost the expectation,
Yeah.
right? It's almost the expectation. Now, I
Yeah.
live in Marin, so I'm living in a bubble inside of a bubble inside of a bubble. I get it. Trust me. I totally get it. You know, they practically give you your yoga mat when you cross the Golden Gate. That's right. And here's your Pilates schedule. All kidding aside, what it really comes down to is people have an elevated set of expectations. And I think that's part of why people left California, not because things were so bad necessarily, but they didn't meet their expectations.
Mhm.
And that's a struggle in today's economy. So much
Mm.
inequality, so much of a divide between the haves and the have-nots, so
Mhm.
much difficulty dealing with big problems like housing and homelessness, so many big challenges with law enforcement and respect for citizens on both sides of that divide, on and on.
Yeah.
But in California, we have such a high standard for what we think we can do that you can easily get disappointed when an average amount of discrepancy or missing that standard that would be accepted anywhere else. Here, it's like California is not what it used to be,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I got to say, wild horses couldn't drag me out of this state. I'm so dedicated to it.
Ugh, I love it. And I think, like, once you were doing the work that you're doing, right?
Oh,
In California, it would be I can't even imagine, it would be so hard.
oh yeah, no, it's here in California. First of all, it's where in many respects our strongest public base is. People really know about EWG in California who wouldn't know about it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Especially, and it's not just the big cities, but it's certainly there. And then also just the chance to go out and meet people and describe what I do, even if they haven't heard of EWG,
Mhm.
they're like, well, that's cool. You're identifying chemicals that we should be worried about in our products, and you're giving people options. Feels
Mhm.
like a very California thing to do.
You're like, "Correct. It is." One thing, Ken, I feel like quite a few Chemo Club members asked me to ask you, and EWG, you guys are fabulous about doing investigative work. And there is right now an investigation going on about the chemical chlormequat found in oat-based products. Now, it's so funny because 3 years ago, oat-based coffees, right, were like the it thing to do. I want an oat-based latte, like, da, da, like, and now all of a sudden, it's like, "Stay away from oats, stay away from oats." Can you tell me more, like, what's happening? What's this
Yeah,
investigation?
this all comes back to one of our wonderful PhD scientists on our staff, Lexi Temkin. And so we had done some work a few years ago, and I touched on it earlier, where we found out that probably most of the dietary exposure we have to Roundup comes from the fact that farmers, particularly in Canada, where most of our oats come from, we don't grow many oats in the US anymore. But
Oh,
in
I didn't know
Canada, and then some other crops like certain small beans that are produced here, farmers spray at the end of the year to dry out the crop right before harvest. It makes it easier for them to harvest it. They can get it out of the field before the rains come, if it's that part of the country where it rains in the fall, most places. So they lose less of the crop to fungus and moisture damage and so forth. So we started campaigning and said we tested Cheerios. We tested Quaker Oats, and we found glyphosate in all of the samples, even some of the organic samples, probably because it drifted from nearby conventional fields. or got mixed up during the processing. So it was a problem, but we identified that if we could just deal with that end of season exposure of these crops, we keep a lot of it away from people. Farmers who sprayed it on their crops would still be exposed. We'd still have other problems with Roundup, but the dietary exposure would be, we think, knocked down dramatically. When we published the results and named the brands, we heard through various sources that Roundup was not being used on oats as much in Canada and elsewhere. Sometimes it was in Canadian grain publications. They said these big elevators will no longer accept oats that have been sprayed with Roundup at the end of the season.
Wow.
So we were making progress, and our scientists said, well, I wonder now if they're using something else to do the same thing, to aid the harvest at the end. And sure enough, she went and looked at chemicals registered in Canada, and one of them was this chlormequat. It operates in a different way. It's a growth regulator that thickens the stem of the plant it's applied to, so it doesn't fall over at the end of the season. That's where you lose a lot of your grain. It's called lodging in small grains like oats and wheat. And so you don't want that to happen. You want to be able to go in and harvest it and get it off the ground. If it's on the ground, you lose a lot of the grain. So they started using this growth regulator called chlormequat. She found it. She said, I wonder if it's showing up in food yet. So we sent a bunch of oats out to the lab. Sure enough, it showed up in most of the oats we tested right away. And we also then sent, I can't remember exactly how many samples, I think 90 some samples of human blood to the lab. We're not pretending these are random samples or representative of the whole population. We just found 90 samples of blood.
Yeah.
And it was in a large proportion of people. So within a few years of it being used heavily in Canada and elsewhere, but Canada specifically on oats, it was already showing up in people. So that's an example. And we published the results of that research in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, just to make sure that we
covered all the bases.
yeah. And so now we're in the throes of trying to make the case to EPA that they shouldn't raise the allowable amount, which they're being asked to do by the industry. In fact, they should pump the brakes a little bit. Let's find out what this stuff might mean if it's going to be in people everywhere, if it's going to be in oats like Roundup used to be. Let's stop playing whack-a-mole here. We don't have to have these things on our grain. We can have oats and other crops without this stuff. So that's a good example of how science drove our agenda or advocacy in a way that really came out of the curiosity of our scientific staff and Lexi Tempkin in
I
particular.
love Lexi.
Right? Just amazing.
She's amazing.
No, she is amazing. I was just on a call with her earlier today, and I've got a lot of people on the staff, everyone on the staff. It's like that. I get to sit at the top of this organization, or maybe off to the side is more accurate, watching them. They're so amazing. And day after day, it's boss, look at this, boss, look at that, or hey, Ken, here's what we found. All these discoveries, because they're great database analysts. They look at public information. They can read the scientific literature. We can commission laboratory studies like Lexi did for blood and food products. So that's the dynamic. That's what it feels like inside EWG, is that sense that we're really here. We're here fighting for your club members. We're here fighting for the public to expose what they're exposed to.
Not to get tin hat on you, but to get a little tin hat. Do you ever just step back and think like, why are all these corporations trying to harm us?
I do all the time. The times when I especially think about it is when I read internal company documents. There was one from Monsanto in particular. I remember we used to have it blown up as a poster on our wall. It came out of Anniston, Alabama, where Monsanto manufactured PCBs for years.
Oh, God.
These were the chemicals that were mostly used in our electrical grid and transformers as a coolant. And they were super toxic. Monsanto knew it for years, didn't tell anybody. Getting into water when the transformers broke or were thrown away. A Swedish scientist, I think, discovered them when he was looking for DDT in human blood. He found PCBs too. And so this document, dated, I think, right around 1970 or thereabouts, maybe a little before, maybe the late 60s, now that I think about it. It said that someone from Monsanto who was aware that PCBs had been discovered in the fish and in the water right below the Monsanto plant in Anniston. And the information had come to a state agency. And from the state agency, they went to Monsanto. And
Mm-hmm.
Monsanto then met with the state agency people and said, let's just keep this quiet. This is perfect. This chemical is perfectly legal. There's no limits for the amount in water or in fish. Maybe the fish were deformed, but we can't blame that necessarily on this chemical. Let's
Right.
just keep it quiet. The memo at the top said something to the effect of confidential, read and destroy. So here's the moment, and it's not corporations, it's the actual humans in the corporation, where I
Yes.
think, how do you type or even read that memo, put it in a folder, put the folder in a file drawer, lock your office, walk out the door, and drive out through the community that you know you have polluted? Who
Yes.
does that? Right? There's a
Exactly.
there's an amazing story in a recent issue of the New Yorker by my one of the journalists I admire most working in this area. Her name is Sharon Lerner. It's
Okay.
also available in ProPublica. And
Okay.
she interviews a scientist who worked for decades at 3M in Minnesota. They were big manufacturers of this PFAS family of chemicals, these forever chemicals that are in all of us, been linked to cancer, been linked to endocrine disruption. They interfere with reproduction, all across the board, really bad chemicals. So she started testing in the 90s because her boss said, see if you can find these are chemicals that we make in these blood samples. And she found it in all the blood samples. But they kept telling her, it's check your equipment, make sure it's right. Checked her equipment, cleaned her lab, still found it. Wasn't an error. This is a PhD scientist, chemist. And they said, don't worry about it because it's safe. The story in the New Yorker is her epiphany, her realization decades later that she'd been lied to by the people in her own company because they had already done animal studies that clearly showed these chemicals weren't safe. She was finding it in human blood. The blood came from all over the country. It wasn't just right in the factory or right in the community. It was everywhere. And that's how those were some of the early studies that we read years later that came out of court cases, didn't go to the government. It just came out of court cases that we realized these forever chemicals were in all of us. The CDC now says upwards of 98, 99% of the public has these chemicals in them. She was stuck in a situation where her livelihood, her loyalty to the company, the very human considerations, she believed what she told them, and she badly wanted to believe what she told them. And as I read the
Right.
article, I had a lot of sympathy for her.
Mhm.
It takes an extraordinary person, it turns out, to stand up to those powers. It's not an everyday thing, but
Exactly.
it ought to be much more common than it is. More people ought to be coming forth. If the company's not going to do the right thing, the people in it should.
Oh, that's so good. I'm gonna clip that for our little teaser. Exactly. But I think what's really hard is that I think there is behind the scenes a lot of intimidation at play. And I
Yeah.
would be surprised at how many emails get sent to certain employees with the whistleblowers, right? Like I think
Oh,
of
sure.
the Boeing cases, right? Like how much intimidation goes on behind the scenes, how many emails are sent to
Oh,
blackmail.
and the confidentiality agreements and
Yeah.
all of the legal instruments. I mean, it's easy for me to say you should speak out, and I think people should find a way to at least get information out. When you lose your livelihood, you lose your home,
Yes.
maybe you're even subject to litigation for violating some agreement you made when you signed up for the company. there's a lot of pressure. And so I think we all have to bear that in mind. But we also have to have an environment, a social environment where it's easier for people to do that. We shouldn't have these restraining legal instruments that make it impossible for people to tell the truth when they know a company is harming human beings, harming public health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of, and just really quickly, can you just highlight what's happening with PG&E?
PG&E, this is another area that is somewhat newer for us to get into. PG&E is the big power company out here in Northern California.
Mhm.
$2.2 billion in profits last year, 25% increase from the year before.
Oh my
And
god.
PG&E it's operating in the regulatory system that was established a century ago when it was decided that it made no sense to have competing utilities stringing competing sets of wires and equipment across communities. We should give specific utilities a monopoly in those areas, but we should just regulate them. The bargain should be that a regulatory authority should make sure they kept prices down, that the monopoly didn't take advantage of the public.
Mhm.
And whatever you think about how this worked for the past 90 years, it's not working very well now because we have the possibility of a distributed grid, with solar energy and battery storage. We don't
Right.
have to think about these big centralized power plants as being the primary way we think about powering our world. And that is very threatening to a utility that is fundamentally based on a system where they get paid to maintain their power lines, their network of lines. They haven't done that a very good job here in California. They've killed
Exactly.
dozens of people and been convicted of felony manslaughter. This company, PG&E, has,
Yep.
and they've pushed very hard to crush rooftop solar on residential areas where they've prevailed on the Public Utility Commission to dramatically reduce the incentives. They're now eagerly extending Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, the only last remaining nuclear plant in the state, 2 reactors seated on top of multiple earthquake fault lines and that are very costly to maintain. It's just the way you would expect a big company to do the most important thing you want to do in a monopoly market, which is maintain the monopoly,
Mhm.
protect the monopoly. So that's what they're doing. And we're standing up and saying, no, we ought to allow more community solar. We ought to allow new
Yep.
ways of generating and sharing electricity. The technology is exploding.
Yeah.
And that's something that PG&E and other big utilities across the country, it's not just PG&E, are fighting against. So we're in these utility fights at the Public Utility Commission. We're obviously continuing to do research and make the case that we should be powering our world in a different way going forward. And
And are we hoping that this will then go to legislature?
the legislature so far has been on the side of the utilities. They have a lot of power, they make a lot of money,
Yeah.
billions and billions of dollars every year. And so it's been up and down. Sometimes I think right now we're at a period where more and more lawmakers in Sacramento are beginning to think maybe we should be thinking differently about this. Maybe we shouldn't be going along so much as we are with PG&E. But it's a struggle. It's really hard to break through, and we're at it every day.
Yeah. That's it's so interesting because what I have noticed, so my husband and I, we just moved into a new spot in San Francisco, and it's just so crazy. There's only two of us, and yet our PG&E bill is around $450 to $500 a month.
Yeah,
And
for gas and electricity.
yes,
Yeah,
which is insane.
yeah,
And so I did the whole like called them, hey, what's up? And they're like, oh, well, it seems like your hours of your most usage is between 4 and 9. And I'm like, that can't be because neither he and I are home between, we get home 8. It's
yeah.
just something about this doesn't make sense. And no one can ever give a straight answer ever. So just besides the whole fact that they're a monopoly, I think they regulate and they operate in a very gray area amongst every part of the company itself.
I think that's right. They did a. I really think that the spending is out of control at PG&E, and I think the regulators are not forcing system change in the way they should. I'll just tell you, we put solar panels on our roof last summer. We got in under the deadline before they completely undercut the benefits of rooftop solar for homeowners.
Okay.
And our electricity bill this last month was $8. It's we're paying for panels that it's
Yeah.
we have a but that's something that's an asset now we own. It's adding value
Absolutely.
to the home. We're sending electricity back to the grid. Uh,
Yes.
and we have a vehicle now that we're hoping will eventually be the backup for those hours right after dark that
Right.
they're gouging you for, right?
Exactly.
So all these technological possibilities make it really clear that we no longer need to live with an electrical grid and the thinking and regulation that goes along with it that we've had in place for 100 years. It's time for change.
Yeah. Oh, like it makes me angry, just like all of this.
Yeah,
Thank,
no,
thank you
it's the
for like
most hated company, I think, in California, just about.
it really is.
Really, it's astonishing that they still have so much influence with the governor and the legislature. I
It's
don't get it,
crazy.
except it's raw power.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's exactly it. And it's
raw
so hard
power.
to go up against that.
Yeah.
Ken, really quickly, can you just educate us on how does one get EWG verified? If you have a product, what does that process look like? And is it difficult? Is it easy? What's barrier the
The
entry?
the general consensus, and I've spoken to many, uh, CEOs and people working for these companies, is that we're a complete pain in the ass. We're to the point I think in some cases, we're still learning how to make it easier for people, not in terms of reaching the standard, but just managing all the paperwork. So we only verify in a couple of consumer categories: personal care products, cleaning products. We have
Mhm.
a mattress, we have diapers,
Yep.
and we'll probably add a few more categories in the year ahead. But just for those categories, we there's a whole range of chemicals that we just say you can't use at all.
Okay.
There's a whole range of chemicals we say if you use it, it has to be within these limits.
Okay.
So they have to provide documentation for all of that. If it's a chemical we don't know much about, we ask them to provide information or data about it. A lot of these companies, they don't really have any science capability. They've come up with a product that they feel is safe, and they've used the kinds of ingredients that other companies are trying to use that are said to be safe. So it's hard for them to generate information. That can become a real hurdle. We ask them to guarantee that there aren't impurities, and we have a long list of those that they have to give us test results for.
Okay.
So it's by far the toughest standard in personal care. There aren't very many out there, but a
Right.
number of them that are out there are pretty easy to meet. I'm not saying you just write a check, but it's pretty close to that.
Right.
For us, it's very difficult, and the program has remained. It's growing. We have thousands of products in the program now, but it's been
Yeah.
slow going because it's tough times in the personal care world and the cleaning product world. Margins are very thin, and they have to ask
Mhm.
themselves, is it really worth getting that seal? And so this is part of the dynamic that we've been enmeshed in for a while. We love the companies we work with; they're so amazing,
Mhm.
and yet we really we put them through the ringer. My friend Michelle Pfeiffer, who's on our board, the famous actor, she's been a friend for many years,
Yeah.
and she went through the process with her fine fragrance, Henry
Mhm.
Rose, and she was the first fine fragrance to be EWG verified. I think maybe we
It's
only have one
huge.
other now. Yeah, and it's a big deal because the other thing we insist on is complete ingredient transparency.
Yeah.
So the nerds in your audience will know that if
Yeah.
something says fragrance on the label, it can hide
Everything.
dozens and dozens of chemicals under just that one term. It's a
Mhm.
loophole in the cosmetics law. So Michelle said, I'm not, if I'm going to try and be verified, my whole product says fragrance, but I'm going to tell everybody what's in it. Now
Yeah.
she's just that deeply committed as a environmental advocate, as a mom. She
Mhm.
tells the story to your point. What changed her? She became a mom. So,
Really.
yeah, that's what really woke her up to all of these concerns. I tell the story first to name drop because why wouldn't you?
Wouldn't
Why
you?
wouldn't you drop that name? But no, she's just, amazingly committed to doing the right thing, and she could have put her name on any, you can
Anything.
imagine, any cosmetic
Anything.
product, right? And it would have been a boon, but she decided to start her own company and make it. And I got to tell you, going through the process with her, it was very difficult. People didn't want to reveal, fragrance houses didn't want their ingredients revealed. And she said, if I can't tell everybody what's in fragrance, I'm not going to do it. So
Yeah.
that's the edge where you want to be on with EWG verified. And that's why we make it so difficult. We're trying to make it logistically easier with the
Right.
same rigor of the standard.
Because if there's no standard to anything, then what's the point?
Yeah, it goes both ways. At the beginning, we came up with these standards, and my first reaction was, if no one meets the standard, that's not a
Mhm.
win. we'll,
You
we'll, we'll have a
failed
licensing
everybody.
we'll have a licensing program with no licensees, and it's not like it's making us tons of money. It's basically paying for the research to keep it going. But we really want to come to the market and say, this is, by the following criteria, this is much better than the other stuff on the market by and large. We wanted to be able to say that. And then we as we looked at it and we started talking to chemists and people in the industry, a lot of people who wanted to do the right thing advised us and said, this would be a stretch for us, but we could get there. And most other companies could too. And so over time, we were able to develop a standard that we felt, yeah, this is a genuine, dramatic step up
Mhm.
from the rest of the market, but it's attainable. You can get there. And once we hit that balance, and open up for business, as it were, we charge a fee to evaluate products. And then
Okay.
depending on the company, it varies a little bit, but we basically charge a very similar fee no matter your size. We let small companies, we give them a break. But yeah, I mean, we wanted a system that would offer that value and that could also, legitimately pay for itself. I couldn't go to my donors and say, hey, can you help us promote a company so it makes more money? I
Right.
can't, the IRS wouldn't let me do it.
Yeah.
So it needed to pay for itself. So there is, and we're, transparent about that. But it's really been interesting, Allie, to see how this has taken off, and people really are committed now to trying to find a way to meet our standard. Other people are coming to us with different categories all the time. They
Yeah.
want us to can you verify this category? Can you start verifying food, etc.? We're not there yet, but we're very excited that we took the risk to do it. And I think that
Uh-huh.
that might be a closing point. I don't know. We don't have to close
Yeah.
now. We're also in the business of taking chances because we're losing. We're not, look out of your window. I mean, I look out and see trees, but what I really see is climate change and, too
Mhm.
much plastic waste and too many chemicals that people don't even know they're exposed to. It doesn't feel like it's a time to be complacent and just protect my little nonprofit and its
Yeah.
budget and let it grow. I have to take some risks.
Right.
And that's what we're not risk averse at EWG. We may get some criticism sometimes for the
Right.
risk we take, but every time we take a risk, it's about advancing human health in a way that we can't do unless we change our tools a little bit. So we
Mhm.
change our tools.
Yeah. To that point, you've been doing this now for 30 years. Looking back on everything that you have done, all the milestones, achievements that EWG has won, and the way that you've truly changed living lifestyles for people. For you personally, what has been the most rewarding part of all this?
Oh, that's a great question. There have been a lot of rewarding things, but I guess if I had to try and sum it up in one way, it's that we decided early on that if we stuck to our science and we're willing to take some risks in the public domain,
Hmm.
that we could make a difference. I think the most important thing, legacy for me at this stage, is to look back at our body of work and realize that there are tens of millions of people who've made changes in their lives to reduce chemical exposures in ways that reduce the risks of some of these chronic and other diseases. I think it's the real impact that we have had through educating consumers who are using their own agency, their own energy, are powering the environmental health movement that we so desperately need. So when I hear someone say, even at grocery stores, sometimes I'll walk through the personal care section and I'll hear someone say, do you know how this rates on EWG? And I, right?
Oh my God, I fall over.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so it's that somehow getting that cultural imprint on a culture that's very hard to even scratch. I think that's the thing I'm proudest of.
Yeah.
We've had plenty of headlines. We've been on 60 Minutes. All that's great. That's all part of it. But the real difference, the tangible difference, making options available to real people to change their lives for the better.
Yeah.
There you go. That would be it, pal.
That's incredible. And then what's next for EWG? What's on the horizon?
We're planning on really deepening our ability to shape scientific debates. We
Okay.
have a couple of initiatives there that we want to take on things like chemical mixtures and exposures and all of that. We're deepening our work there. We
Okay.
certainly want to maintain our commitment to look at the exposures that people encounter in everyday life, identify more of those, identify more options, pressure companies, and when we can, pressure the government to be held accountable to make better choices available to everybody, democratize it for everybody.
Yeah.
I think we'll be doing more work on energy here in California. I think
Okay.
PG&E will continue to hear from us.
Okay.
And we definitely are interested in making sure that California can make good on its promise to create the next generation of a clean energy economy. I'm worried that we're not going to get there the way we're proceeding right now. So we want to be in that fight too.
And my last question for you. Of all of your dad,
Yep.
of all the issues as of right now that we know of, right? Forever chemicals, pesticides, climate change, da, da, which one, if you had to choose one, I know they're all important, but which one are you most concerned about for your kids?
Um, I would say the most important thing, kind of tying back to the thing I'm proudest of, is to imbue in Cal a sense of agency and importance in taking care of his own health, eating healthy, being
Mhm.
thoughtful about what he uses to uh, take care of his body, take care of his home, and so forth. Hasn't
Mhm.
all sunk in yet. I can tell you that. He's 16, so he has a mind of his own, a mind I happen to love. But yeah, I think that might be it in terms of the problems out there. Oh, I worry no end about climate change. I worry about the mess we're making of our oceans,
Mhm.
the plastic waste that's now in all of us in micro levels. I worry about all of those things, species diversity, that he'll come into a world that is impoverished as a result of what humans have done, not enriched. And it should be the other way around. But
Right.
but I really want him to come away with a commitment to understanding and taking care of his own health based on the best available information he can get, whether it's from us or someone else. I really hope that sticks. I think it has.
Yeah.
But he does like a lunch meat sandwich every so often.
Like we say at the Chemo Club, everything in moderation.
There you
Food is
go.
the point of life.
That's right. That's exactly right. I love the chemo club. I love the idea of it. I love that you founded it. I'm so proud to have spent some time with you, honored to have spent some time with you. And let me repeat what you tell your club members. We are here with you. You are not alone. We
Yeah.
are all rowing in the same direction. If there's information we can provide from EWG that you'd like us to provide and we're not providing now, I want the chemo club to let me know what that is because you're an important audience for us. And Thrilled to be in your company.
Thank you so much, Ken. You are the best. Really quickly, how can people support EWG? How do we support you? How do we find you? How do people download the reports?
Go to ewg.org. That's the mothership. That's
EWG.org. Okay.
ewg.org. I also have a podcast. It's called Ken Cook is Having Another Episode.
I
A-
love that.
and I have them regularly. Some of them are pretty bad. Some of them are pretty happy, but I have them all the time.
Okay.
And as I lurch from one to another, I hope you'll join me
Yes.
on Ken Cook is Having Another Episode.
Ken Cook is having another episode. Okay, amazing. So ewg.org for all things environmental working group. Ken is having another episode is the podcast.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yep.
And then are the Skin Deep and EWG verified reports on the website?
Those databases are there. You can go to the tap water database and find out what's in your tap water. You can go to the Shopper's Guide to Pesticides and Produce and get our best advice on how to steer clear of pesticides if those concern you.
Okay.
Same with cleaning products. So we have lots of those guides, and we have one section of the site that goes through every room of your house and really tells you what some of the top concerns might be, including if you're refurbishing, if you're buying new furniture, if you're painting, if you're buying carpet or flooring. All of those questions we try and sort through for you, give you our best advice.
That's incredible. Mr. Cook, thank you for everything. Thank you for your generosity with your time and your thoughtfulness and your answers. Just incredible. You really are an angel. So thank you.
Thank you, and best of luck with your great work. Keep it up, and we're here to help.
Thank you.